It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Kids need to have a radar. They need to understand what's going on online and that not everybody is who they say they are when they're online.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
A quick content warning for today's podcast. While not explicit, the material that we're sharing today may not be suitable for younger listeners. Parental discretion is advised. We're having a conversation today with Detective Superintendent Jayne Crossling. Jayne is from the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, also known as ACE, essentially Australian Federal Police, looking after our kids online. Jayne, really an absolute delight to be able to speak with you on the Happy Families podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Justin.
Can you tell us a bit about what ACE does, the ACCCE, ACE? What do you guys do with the AFP?
So it's a centre, it's based in Brisbane, and it is led by the Australian Federal Police, and it is essentially the front door for reporting of crimes associated with children being exploited online. So we take all of the reports that have an Australian nexus from all the social media services. And really importantly, we take reports where someone under the age of 18 has been exploited online, where either the offender or the victim is Australian.
Okay. I want to just differentiate between what you do and what the eSafety Commissioner does, because they look after a whole lot of bullying stuff online. They look after all sorts of sordid and challenging things that are occurring online. How is ACE with the AFP different to the Australian government's eSafety Commissioner? So
we very much work closely with the eSafety Commissioner, and we have an excellent partnership. The eSafety Commissioner is responsible definitely for cyberbullying in the child context, image-based abuse where it relates to an adult, and they are also responsible as the regulator for content that any Australians have access to. They have tremendous powers to be able to remove content if it is harmful, abhorrent, or essentially illegal. We in the Australian Federal Police and certainly the ACE are responsible for investigating crimes associated with children being abused online.
Okay, so I have an example that I want to share. It is quite sensitive, and as I shared at the start of the podcast, listener discretion is advised. But if you've got tweens or teens, it's probably worth hearing this story and being aware that this stuff happens. So a mum contacted me maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. She said that her teenage son came into the bedroom crying. He was really distressed. She managed to help him to be calm, said, "What's going on?" He said, "Mum, I need to borrow $500. And she said, "Sweetheart, what do you need $500 for? That's you've never asked for money before. What's going on?" He said, "I can't tell you. I just need the $500. She said, "Kiddo, I love you and I'll give you the $500 if it's appropriate, but I need to know why you need $500 and why you're so distressed about it. What trouble are you in?" Eventually, he calmed down enough to tell her that he'd met this really, really gorgeous girl online. She was from overseas. She'd been Snapchatting with him. She was a friend of a friend of a friend. They'd gotten a little bit intimate in their Snapchat messaging. Then, after a couple of weeks of this, she had sent him an image of herself completely naked, sent a nude image via Snapchat, which he was obviously enticed and aroused by. And then she sent another one and said, "Now it's your turn. You need to send me one." He did that. And then she disclosed to him that she wasn't actually who she said she was. And she was, I don't know, some middle-aged man overseas. And unless he could send a couple of $100 in Bitcoin immediately, that image that he had sent, the nude image of himself to her, was going to be shared with everybody in his online directory, on his Facebook, on his Snapchat, on his TikTok, on the whole lot. It was going to go out to everyone, parents, grandparents, the lot. He actually made a transfer of a couple of $100 in Bitcoin. Then she said, or he said, or the offender said, "Actually, that's not quite enough. Now I need $500. And at that point, he realized he was out of money. He didn't have any options. And he went to his mum and said, "I really need help." This is, I guess, the kind of work that you're dealing with regularly. This is that exploitation online that you're describing.
Yes, you have provided what is precisely the scenario that we are seeing play out across Australia.
Jayne, how much does it happen? Like, how much is this happening? Because we're hearing about online fraud and online hacking and online scams more than we've ever heard before. How much is this child, tween, teen, online sexual exploitation happening?
Okay, so these groups that are behind it, definitely predominantly offshore. So these are the same groups that have been scamming us through a variety of different types of scams for decades, and they have evolved. So now they are seeing young people as targets, particularly westernised countries. So Australia in that regard is not immune. So the reports that we are getting, we're averaging about 100 children and or their families coming forward to various Australian authorities each month in Australia right now, and that is trending upwards. The way that you described that scenario is precisely how it does tend to play out. So a young person, and it's predominantly boys. At the moment, our data shows it's 92% of boys are actually being victimised through this particular type of scam. And it plays out differently between girls and boys. But what generally happens is that they're friended on a particular platform and then moved very rapidly to a different platform where they can chat in more relative privacy. So it might be some sort of encrypted chat platform. The conversations frequently turn very sexualised. And there is, as you described, that sharing of sexualised imagery by the offender, who is often purporting to be a very attractive female in the boy scenario. And then the request comes out for the boy to produce self-produced imagery of himself and then share it. And then that extortion or sextortion that we've referred to, then that takes place. They frequently ask for a very, very high amount of money that is inconceivable for a young person, and they at times enter into negotiations. And just like in your scenario, sometimes payment does not make the problem go away. Sometimes that just is the start of it. They will continue to demand payment over a period of time. So this is really worrying us. We believe that it's severely underreported. So I said that we're getting about 100 reports a month. We believe that it is far more prevalent than we're aware of. We are hoping that we do two key things right now. Two things: driving reporting. So reporting really needs to come into the ACE predominantly. We need to have those reports. And then also prevention. We need to find ways to reach into the hearts and minds of young people so that they know the signs, they know how to detect when this scam might be playing out right in front of their eyes.
Don't know if you can answer this one or not, Jayne, but are there any specific platforms that parents should be particularly mindful of where this kind of exploitation occurs more than perhaps other platforms? Is there anywhere that's safer? Is there anywhere that's less safe? Statistically,
we get this question a lot, Justin, and we do try to not demonise particular platforms, particularly if they can be used in a relatively safe manner. So essentially, the platforms are the types of platforms that young people typically congregate on. They're the ones. These scammers, they are essentially about making money. This is a whole new type of offending that we haven't necessarily had to deal with. In the past, when we've dealt with offenders, it's because they have a sexual interest in children. This is not the case with this particular cohort. This is organised crime based offshore, who are seeing these children as a money-making opportunity, and they're being completely exploited financially and do not care about the impact on young people and the ripple effects across the community. So the platform will be something that is attractive to young people generally, but it doesn't really matter what that platform is. They're moved off that platform so rapidly onto encrypted chat.
Jayne, I want to highlight something that I think is critical here, and that is how few parents are really engaging with what their children are doing online. So as you're aware, I travel around the country. I give lots and lots of talks all over the place, in schools, in corporates, in all sorts of organisations. And whenever the topic moves to the digital space, we see a massive decline in parents showing up for these parent evenings or showing up for the toolbox talks at lunchtime. It's almost like there's this passive disinterest. It's kind of like, oh, look, the kids are going to be on the screens and they'll be fine. Why is it, do you think, that parents are less likely to be engaged? And what can we do to help parents to be more in on this stuff? Because clearly it's affecting their children in significant and concerning ways.
Yes, until it actually happens to a child or someone close to a family group, I don't think they fully appreciate the impact of when things go wrong online. So this is a problem that the Australian Federal Police has grappled with for a while now. We do have an online safety program called Think You Know, and that is an opportunity to have people come and speak to parents, teachers and carers. And we get mixed face-to-face attendance at these sorts of events. We've grappled with that challenge of how to engage the potentially disengaged parent. And we've also done some market research to show, and it confirms exactly what you're seeing anecdotally. It confirms that only about half of parents know what their children are doing online and would know how to have a conversation about what their child is doing. The really critical message that if we only had, one key message is that parents need to talk to their children. Parents need to understand how much of a part online behaviour is of a young person's life. And they need to talk to their children about what they're doing and help them understand to recognise that there is sometimes suspicious behaviour going on online.
Okay, so there are two questions that come out of this conversation that we're having here. The first one is, how do we prevent a scenario like I shared and like you've described from occurring in the first place? The second question is, what do we do if it happens? So can we just go to question one? This is the think you know kind of content. This is the idea where we're saying parents just be involved. But what's the central message that you would give to parents to help their kids to make safe, healthy decisions online?
So I would absolutely say from a prevention standpoint, kids need to have a radar. They need to understand what's going on online and that not everybody is who they say they are when they're online. And I believe that these sorts of messages are taught throughout all the stages of a young person's development. But I think the key thing that a parent or a carer can do in the home environment is to reinforce those messages. So kids need to have an appreciation that they need to do a little bit of sense checking when someone wants to friend them. And then they need to also understand when a conversation might turn very, very sexual very rapidly, what's behind that? What's going on there? And is there an opportunity to educate the kids to have better judgment when it comes to having these conversations in a highly sexualised way with someone that they genuinely don't know?
Follow-up question number one. How do you help kids to recognise that friends of friends of friends aren't really friends?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think they need to be just a little bit more circumspect in their decision-making online. And I agree, it is an absolute challenge, and it means that we have to keep being consistent with our messaging.
Right.
Having law enforcement come into the school environment, and we certainly do that. The program that the AFP runs trains all the state and territory police, and then they go into the school environment to deliver directly to the young people in an age-appropriate and segmented way. But it's going to have to be a consistent effort, and everybody's going to have to be united in their messaging so that young people learn that discretion and learn to make some really safe choices when they're operating online.
Okay. Follow-up question number two. How quickly do these sextorters, these groomers, how quickly do they step into sexualised conversation and start to make demands? I mean, in the example that was shared by the mum that spoke with me, this occurred over a couple of weeks. Is that standard? Does it happen faster? Is that particularly quick? What's the typical time frame that you're seeing this kind of thing happen?
We are seeing a slight variation, but it can be very, very rapid. We're seeing it particularly for some of the younger victims. We're seeing that it's been very rapid in terms of turning towards being sexual. So, the friending happens very rapidly, then very, very rapidly being moved to a different platform, that's an indicator. So this is something that we could highlight to young people to say, there should be some suspicion there where you're being friended rapidly and then very rapidly moved off that platform to another platform. And there are other clues that a young person may not be all that sophisticated in picking up on, but these are the sorts of clues that we've had to determine over the years so that we as adults are able to avoid scams. And that could be signs that there are inconsistencies, and there are maybe signs that they don't have English as a first language. That's another sign. And they may make excuses to say, oh, no, I actually can't turn on my webcam, or my microphone's not working, so that they can stick to chat, because the organised crime syndicate behind all of this have only instructed all of their workers, who are just, operating probably out of some sort of call centre overseas, and they're told that that the crime is facilitated better if they just stick to the chat rather than dealing with microphones and obviously exposing themselves via a video to not being an attractive female. But these are all nuanced and sophisticated. So I think it all is necessary that a parent help have that conversation based on their understanding of their own child and their understanding of, scams more broadly as well. And I think that can help alleviate and work towards our prevention goal.
Okay, so that's prevention. What about when it's happened? What about when you have to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff rather than the fence at the top? This mum, she's had her son make a fairly substantial error of judgment. Now he's distressed. His sexual imagery is going to be potentially, in fact, in this case, it was sent to grandparents and aunties and uncles. It was sent to everybody in his friends list, which caused considerable distress. How do parents deal with that scenario? What happens when it's too late?
Firstly, reporting, very important.
So we're going to link to the ACE website for reporting, but could you just share it with us now as well? What's the website and how do people make this report?
So there's a web form on the ACE website, which is ACCCE.gov.au, and we can absolutely provide a link that will take the listening community straight to that particular form, plus other resources more broadly as well. So just to answer your question, we can come at this from two angles. One is the messages for the parents themselves, and then also ways in which we can support the victim as well. So for parents and carers, we obviously want them to talk to their children already. We really advocate for a very open relationship when it comes to online behaviour. And we believe that if you can find an opportunity to set the groundwork there as a young person moves through the different phases of their online behaviour, that should something go wrong, they're more likely to take a problem to the parent. So some parents express reluctance and, they're claiming that they're too ignorant to understand what's going on. We say to parents, push past all of that. Don't be hung up on the platform or the technology or anything like that. Get to the heart of what the problem is and get to the heart of, what's gone wrong online. So we know that teenage, particularly males, are coming forward to parents. In the event that they do, and even if that is after the sextortion threat has actually played out, we really hope that parents can be understanding in that very first disclosure, that they understand the problem for what it is and understand that the child here in this scenario is a victim and that they need support.
Yeah, so don't add to their suffering. Don't rip into them and say, what were you thinking? Because now's not the time. Talk to them about that stuff later.
That's exactly right. So I think for many parents, it will be very hard to not have that immediate impulse to sort of say, oh my goodness, what have you done? And it's very challenging as a parent to hear that, but you'd have to stay very, very calm, I think. And we absolutely understand that it can be very distressing, not only for the child, but for the parent community as well, to know that this has happened to your child. And I think parents have to acknowledge too that this could actually have long-term impacts. So regardless of whether or not there was payment, regardless of whether or not the images were ultimately shared, this could still have long-term impacts on a young person. So that's where we move to the victim support. We absolutely appreciate from a young person's perspective why they would want to hide this behaviour and think that they have enough in their toolkit to fix the problem themselves. But as we know, that's absolutely not true. So we're trying to encourage young people to step forward and tell a parent. It's so important that if a young person does do that, that the parent then actually listens and takes action. So part of it is listening and part of it is actually following up and taking action. What's usually happened, as well as, the behaviour that we've already described, is that the offender will tell the young person that what they've done is actually a crime, and that serves as a further way to manipulate the young person to not report, to not tell parents or law enforcement. So we really want to emphasise the fact that do not buy into that. They have to report it, and the young person will not be treated as a criminal, because of course that's a barrier for a young person coming forward if they thought that they would be treated as a criminal. So the offenders will use a range of tactics. They'll use fear, they'll use shame, they'll manipulate a young person, they'll make them feel alienated or trapped. So the only way to break that cycle is by getting a parent or an adult of some sort involved. Until law enforcement can get involved, we don't know whether or not we have to intervene in other legal ways as well. So that's why it's critical. Additionally, as soon as law enforcement can know the size and shape of the problem, we can actually take action from an investigative standpoint. And this is what we're doing. We're finding ways to disrupt this behaviour at a very high level. And that's all playing out right now, but only because reporting's being driven into us. So that's the criticality of it. But in order for us to actually wrap the support around the victim and get them access to the support services that they need, we can't do that without the victim actually revealing this, initially to family and then ideally to law enforcement. So from a parent perspective, avoiding blame is so incredibly important, and then working out what more help does that child need. Do they actually need to engage with professional support services as well?
My guess is that they shouldn't pay any money. What's your advice around this?
From what we're seeing with this particular crime, we would recommend not paying. We think that's really important because in the scenario you described, even though payment had been made, they demanded more. We believe, and this is consistent with other types of scams as well, that don't send any more money, certainly don't send any more images or video, even if they continue to threaten, and even if they eventually share it. So essentially that's the worst thing that could have happened, and it did happen, and then you deal with that particular problem. But there's no guarantee that if you pay, that wouldn't have happened, as you saw in that scenario. So even if we are complying with demands, there's no impetus for that particular organised crime group to stop. So we would say, do not pay.
When I hear you say that, Jayne, it's fascinating to me because it aligns with a story that I heard just a couple of years ago from a mum of a young lady who was approached online. She was sextorted. She was threatened. Once she had shared the image, if she didn't pay that those images were going to be shared, she went to her mum and said, here's what's happened. I've sent a topless image of myself to somebody who's not who they said that they were. She was in tears, devastated, thought it was the end of her life. She also came from an Islamic family from overseas, very, very strict family. And she was terrified that the shame that she had brought onto her family was going to literally cause horrendous problems, massive, overstated, enormous problems. Her mum gave her a big hug and said, we will let everybody know and we will tell them that it wasn't you, that somebody's done some fancy photoshopping and it's not actually you, but we have been targeted. So this mum essentially said, we're going to lie to the whole family, say that you were targeted, you didn't do it, but they've pretended that you have, and that will pacify all of the family members who are going to be up in arms. But I thought, what a wise way to respond. If the photo gets out there, if the image is out there, just say, guess what? It was photoshopped, or say, we have a teenager who did something dumb. and we're going to love our teenager in spite of the dumb thing. It's been a really profound lesson for everybody, and I'm so sorry that you had to see that image. And just let it go. Don't make a big deal about it. I thought it was great advice.
I do think that as well, because basically the worst thing that you thought was going to happen has happened. then you step through it with your parents' support. I just think that's the only way to deal with it properly and minimise, not eliminate, but minimise the harm.
I'm listening to everything that you're saying, Jayne, and I'm thinking to myself, who does this? Like, what kind of a person actually gets online and does this and tries to cause this level of pain and challenge in a young person's life? It's staggering. Such an important conversation. So for people who want more information, more resources around the things that we've discussed today, because we've really only scratched the surface, whereabouts would you send them? We'll obviously link to it in the show notes, but where would you have them go?
We have a response kit that describes the problem and describes how to address it. So we'll absolutely provide you the link to that. That's a really handy document, also available online. And, there's an opportunity there for parents to educate them more broadly as well about other things that we're seeing. So right now, for us, this is one of the most critical issues that we're facing. We don't have a full picture, but this could actually be linked to youth suicide. That's how seriously we are taking this particular problem right now. And we may never know whether or not this has actually had that type of impact on a young person. So this is why right now, this is where so much of our effort is being placed. But that's not to say there aren't other really serious crimes playing out, impacting on young people all the time. So for parents, there's going to be those resources there. There's the ability to report. There's the ability to also protect and prevent as well through this response kit.
Okay. Detective Superintendent Jayne Crossling, such an important conversation. Jayne is from the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, ACCCE, known as ACE, with the Australian Federal Police. Fascinating conversation, devastating conversation. Really grateful for the work that you do and for the things that you've shared with us today to help parents to navigate an increasingly complex parenting world. Thank you so much, Detective Superintendent Jayne Crossling.
Thank you, Justin.
Detective Superintendent Jayne Crossling from the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation with the Australian Federal Police has been our guest. All of the resources, all of the places you can go to get support are available in the podcast show notes today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it's been a helpful podcast. As always, the Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media with Craig Bruce as our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier and protecting them, please check out happyfamilies.com.au.